gaming history. There have been games that started out as arcades and then were soon ported to consoles, and one such game was both a massive hit in sales and a critical failure at the same time, that being Pac Man for the Atari 2600. Pac Man was first ported to the Atari 2600 in 1982 under the Namco license and was programmed by Todd Fry, with only having 6 months to complete it. And hoping for some massive sales with it as well, they made over 1 million copies of the game and created a National Pac Man Day on April 3rd, 1982 to help promote the game. Even though it stands as one of the best-selling video games of all time, selling more than 7,000 copies at the time, it still was a massive failure when critics ripped to shreds, stating that the poor graphics and sound of the game made it look as far from the original arcade version as it could possibly be, thus putting it on the list of worst video games of all time, and also one of the worst ports of all time as well. Massive hit all over the world, Atari decided to license it to produce it for their Atari 2600. So programming fell to Todd Fry to create the port. He wasn't given any arcade specifications to work with, so he had to end up playing the actual arcade game, and spent only 6 months developing it and putting it on Atari's 4K ROM cartridge. To deal with the limitations, Fry decided to make the maze more simplified and repetitive, and change the dots from the original arcade to wafer-looking things that share the same wall color in the 2600. The same as the arcade original. You play Pac Man having to gobble up all the dots, all the while avoiding ghosts who are out to get you. However, there are some key differences between the arcade version and the Atari port, one being the way the game was designed. The original was designed in portrait mode, whereas the port was in landscape mode, thus making the wraparound tunnel at the top rather than on the sides, like in the arcade original. The design of Pac Man himself was different as well. Atari gave him an eye and only allowing him to face left or right, never up or down. The ghost's eyes moved forward directions rather than face in the direction of travel. The bonus fruit was replaced with a nondescript single-digit vitamin, and the final change from the original was the sound. The familiar waka waka sound heard when Pac Man eats a dot was replaced with a clank and beep sounds, as well as replacing the familiar 4-tone melody at the start of 4 million pre-orders in 1981, just one of the 2600 version of the game. In later years, it was noted that it was one of the best-selling video games in 1982, thus even surpassing Space Invaders. However, on May 11th, 1982, the game got its first negative review in Electronic Gaming Monthly, which was the magazine's actual first negative review of an Atari game, stating that considering the anticipation and considerable amount of time that Atari designers had to work on it, it's astonishing to see how a home version of a classic arcade contest is so devoid of what gave the original its charm. In 1998, Next Generation magazine called it the worst coin-op conversion of all time, for consumers' loss of confidence in the video gaming industry in the 1980s, and since been one part of the blame for the infamous 80s video game crash. However, to try to bounce back from it, Atari then re-released the game for the Atari 5200 with graphics that looked better and more true to the original, and became one of the 5200's launch titles. And then they added 2 more sequels to the game, Pac Man and Jr. Yet another ambitious undertaking by Atari. This one I also can't blame on the creator, since Todd Fry had to deal with the limitations of the Atari 2600, as well as having nothing to work off of besides just playing the original arcade game to figure out what he needed to do. Atari Pac Man is a game at best and a total flop at worst. My best way to sum up all of that has been said is that Atari Pac Man is the best-selling flop of all time. If you remember playing this game back in the arcades or even on the Atari, say so down in the comments below. I'm Paul with RetroDoc saying peace out, stay frosty, and don't forget Pac Man Fever. Out of my mind.